And good morning. As he said, my name is Stuart. I'm one of the leaders here at River, and along with our leadership team and our members, welcome. It's good to see everyone. It's good to be celebrating Jesus together with you guys this morning. We are in the middle of a 3-week series we've called Roadmap. We launched this last week. We'll talk about it this week, and then we'll wrap up next week. And as Brent just mentioned, there is a ton going on right now, not just for our church, but really throughout Norman. I mean, life is full, active, streets are full. I was walking around campus last night, dodging cars, and just mobs of college kids that were kind of wandering late at night, just wandering. And it's active, it's full. And so what we want to do is, at the fall semester, we like to do a series like this that helps us launch and just realign on who we are and what we are as a church, what we want to hold fast to. So our goals in this series, in this 3 weeks, is really threefold. First, I want to help connect where we are today as a church with the journey and the road that we've been on, along with the journey and the road that we believe God has called us to in the future. So thus the title, Roadmap. Secondly, I want to help reaffirm who we are as a church and what God has constituted us to be here in Norman. And third, I want us to dream. I want to give you guys space to dream about what is next, what could be next, and what might God be doing. So those are our aims for the Roadmap. Oh, thank you. Kids, if you are still in here, you are welcome to go back to your Bible study. So if anybody hasn't already taken their kids back there, we have a Bible study that's down the hall to your left as you exit these main doors, and you're welcome to take your kids back there to our splash area, and they can hang out and have their Bible study. So, okay, back on track. So what is our roadmap for this series? Well, I described last week that we had a working team a couple years ago that really dug deep into the question of who we are as a church and what we need to be about. And so I went into more detail last week. I'm not going to go in as much depth today, but essentially our roadmap for this series is our mission as a church, who we are as River, which is together as a church, we want to actively demonstrate and proclaim the powerful gospel of Jesus Christ. Essentially, as we were addressing the question, how do we practically put into practice Jesus' command at the end of Matthew 28, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, as we were asking that question of ourselves, and what does that look like for River here in Norman, Oklahoma, this is what it boiled down to. Together, we actively demonstrate and proclaim the powerful gospel of Jesus Christ. And then there's 4 key values or core values that kind of support that mission. And we talked about the first one last week, which is knowing Jesus. Next week, we'll talk about the final 2, focusing outward and serving together. Today, we're going to talk about developing relationships. And let me just caveat. The New Testament has a ton to say about relationships. We're not going to be able to cover it all today. In fact, I really struggled to be concise in my comments this morning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a couple slides where it'll just have additional references, where if this week you want to go and do some additional study on your own, I'm going to give you the material, and then you go dig deeper into what I'm sharing this morning. So sometimes you can write that down on your piece of paper if you're taking notes. It might be easy if you just grab your phone and snap a quick picture. But then in your time with Jesus, or maybe separate study you want to set aside in the coming weeks, you can dig deeper into this. Sound good? Okay. So developing relationships. Why do we want to develop relationships? What is that all about? Well, for us, it comes down to Jesus commanded us to do this. Jesus told us to develop relationships and to love one another. John 13, 34, and 35 is kind of our foundational passage for this, which says, "A new command I give to you, that you should love one another, even as I have loved you, that you love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." So this passage, these couple verses, are part of an evening that Jesus spent with his disciples. Some of you guys know it as the Last Supper. It was near the end of his life. Some of you know the story about Jesus washing his disciples' feet. That happened just a couple verses before this instruction, right? And so he tells his followers, "A new command I give to you." Now, what is he talking about? What was the old command? Well, if we look back in the Old Testament, in Leviticus 19:18, we find what he's referring to. And that's a passage where Moses was giving instruction to this new people that God had called out from Egypt, a new people that was going to be this nation that was going to show God's love and who he was to all the other nations and peoples of the world. And Moses was giving this people instruction, and he said in Leviticus 19:18, "You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." So Jesus refers back to this passage, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Now in that command, or in that instruction, who is the standard? What's the measure? Well, I'm the standard. How do I want to be treated? I will treat you the way I want to be treated. We refer to that often as the golden rule, right? That had been the standard for generations for God's people. But when Jesus came, and in this passage in John 13, he gives a new command, a new bar. What does he say? He says, "You shall love one another." So that's a common theme between these two instructions. "Even as I have loved you, that you also should love one another." New standard now. It's no longer how I want to be treated, what my preferences are. That's how you need to relate to me. Now we're to relate to one another with the same love that Jesus loved us with. He is now the standard. How did he love us? That's how I need to think about and consider, should I be loving Andy Morris in the same fashion, with that same measure? How do I do that? Right? And then he goes on and he says at the end of this passage, "By this all men will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another." So this is going to be the mark of the followers of Jesus. How are you going to know the people of Jesus? Is it because we all have the same haircuts or get the same tattoos? No. It's because there's going to be a relational marker that identifies those who know Jesus and who have been impacted by his love, right? So this is the base mark. This is the foundation. This is the launching point. When we talk about developing relationships, for us, it's all going to come back here. We want to love others the same way that Jesus has loved us. Now let me also kind of, a secondary why. So Jesus commanded us, but a secondary why, I personally have been impacted by this. Most of you are here because you've been impacted because and by people who loved you with the same love that Jesus loved them. That's why you're here. So we've seen it. We've seen the impact in our own lives. So many of us believe in this. And that's why, for us, developing relationships is very, very, very important and core. So if it's so important, how do we do this? How do we develop relationships with one another? How do we do it in a way that's healthy and good and glorifies God and is not just about you and me? Well, I'm going to use a simple illustration this morning. I'm going to use a home and the different elements of a home. And for some of you, this is going to be older material where you've heard this before. Hopefully it's a good refresher. For some of us, it's going to be new, and I hope it makes sense. I recognize that relationships can be complex, messy things. And so my purpose this morning is not to oversimplify, but instead, this illustration is designed to break the elements or phases of relationship down so that we can do a simple and easy self-assessment of where am I in each of these phases. And those phases are a porch, a living room, and then a kitchen. different areas of your house: a porch, living room, and then the kitchen. Okay, what am I talking about? What's a porch? What's a relational porch? Well, a relational porch is just like the porch on your home. It's a place where you welcome people. It's the entryway into relationship, right? A porch is a place where you feel welcome. If you were to go to my home right now, you would probably not feel very welcome because we are currently renovating our house, and it's down to the studs on the inside. And one of the first things we did is we took all of the items on our porch off. We emptied it off because there's so much traffic, so many contractors in and out. It was starting to get a little crazy out there. So the flowers are gone, the wreaths are gone, the chairs are gone. We're not turning the lights on at night. If you pull up after dark, it's going to look like nobody lives there because nobody does live there. And you would walk up and you would not feel welcome because, frankly, we don't really want you there right now. We want the guys working on the house there so that they can get done and we can get back in. But as soon as we're back in, guess what? The chairs are going to go back out there. We're going to put a wreath up. There'll probably be seasonal decorations. My wife's smiling. She's got ideas and plans already. Why? Because when you come to our home, we want you to feel welcome. We want you to feel valued. We want you to feel important. It's the same way with a relational porch. When people come and bump into you, what is your posture toward them? How do they feel? Are you welcoming, inviting? That's the question we want to ask when we think about our relational porch. So let me give a couple of examples from Jesus' life, and we can maybe use him as a guide on how we can develop or think about our relational porch. So first, I'm just going to kind of touch on a couple stories. This is going to be a great opportunity. You can grab some of these references and maybe do some deeper study this week. But the story of Zacchaeus, Luke 19. A lot of you guys know about Zacchaeus. He was a tax collector. In fact, he's called a chief tax collector in this passage. He was also a very short man. I have some theories about maybe why he lived the life that he lived in his time and his day. Physical deformity carried a lot of stigma with it. So if you had a crippled or disfigured arm or foot, it was commonly associated with some kind of unrighteousness or sin, or maybe God didn't favor you. So it was possible that it's being shorter than normal. Zacchaeus maybe had grown up with people kind of giving him the side eye, and maybe he wasn't included in the social circles that maybe he wanted to be included in. He wasn't one of the cool kids. And then when he became of age and he chose a profession, he chose to be a tax collector. And what we know about that profession in this time is the Romans would go into an area, into a civilization, and they would use the local people to carry out their day-to-day business, but all the strength would be the Roman army. And so they would go in and they would have locals gather the taxes for them. And the way that the tax collector would make his income was he was going to skim a little bit off the top. And so it's possible that maybe Zacchaeus decided he was going to make up for his literal shortcoming with his lack of height by, I'm going to be wealthy, I'm going to find a way to be rich, and I'm going to get back at all these people who maybe looked down at me all these years. And so he became a tax collector. And even though he was a Hebrew, he was probably an outcast because his friends and neighbors and maybe even his family would look at him and say, well, you're betraying your people because you're working for our enemies. So even though he was wealthy, I don't know that it filled the hole that he was looking to fill in his life. So Zacchaeus hears about this teacher, this man who's walking through these different villages, and he has the power to heal, and he has the power to transform people's lives, and he wants to see this man. But he's short, right? So he can't just go and stand in the crowd with everybody else. So what does he do? He goes and climbs up into this tree. And from all we know, this is Jesus' first interaction. He's never seen Zacchaeus before. This would have been a true, front porch, first exposure to this guy. And he sees this man up in his tree, in his perch. We don't know a lot of the details, but I would imagine that Jesus probably looked at him and recognized that he was wearing nicer clothes than the average. And Jesus was a sharp guy. He probably put together pretty quickly what this guy did. And there was a reason he was in the tree and everybody else was standing on the road. Jesus had every opportunity just to walk on by. That would have been socially acceptable. In fact, probably most of the people in the crowd would have preferred it if he would have just walked on by. But what does he do? He doesn't just walk on by. He stops and he interacts with this guy. And he says, Zacchaeus, come down from that tree. Come down. In fact, not only come down from this tree, but why don't we go to your house for dinner? I'm going to come and I'm going to have a meal with you. So we see from that interaction that Jesus paid attention to people. He recognized people, and he maybe looked past some of the stigmas that you and I might get caught up with, whether it's social or physical or something else. And he looked and he saw the value in the person. And he moved toward them. He was open to that relationship. Another story is the woman at the well. A lot of us are familiar with that story. Jesus and his followers were on this journey. It's hot, and they reach this well. It's the middle of the day. And in John 4, where this story is told, it says Jesus was weary. He was tired in verse 6. So his disciples say, why don't you hang out by this well? And we will go and get food, and then we'll be back for a little bit. And while he's hanging out, this lady walks up in the middle of the day, in the afternoon, usually when people didn't go out and get water because it was hot. Usually you would do that in the morning and in the evening when it's much cooler. And this lady walks up, and she's a Samaritan, which they were, Hebrews saw them as half Hebrews because their ancestors had married some of the locals, and so they weren't true Hebrews. And so they were seen as enemies, or they didn't hang out well. They didn't like one another. And she was a woman. And in this time, it would have been socially acceptable for Jesus not to interact with this lady at all. She was a woman. She's not one of my people. It would have been probably more than likely, most people would have just not even acknowledged her as she came out. And she would have gotten her water and left, and there would be no interaction. But what does Jesus do? What do we know about the story in John 4? Does he allow that to happen? No. He's tired. It's been a long day. But what does he do? Jimmy, he reaches out to her relationally, right? He moves toward her. He engages her in conversation. And he begins to ask questions. And initially, she kind of rebuffs him and says, no, I'm not getting into this with this guy. And he keeps kind of pressing. He keeps prying. Keeps asking questions. Keeps moving toward her. And soon, her life begins to change as she interacts with Jesus. So what do we learn from this story? Well, part of having a healthy relational porch is not just waiting for people to come to you all the time. But just like in this story, Jesus moved toward this woman. Are we willing to move toward other people? Not just see value in them, but actually move toward and initiate a relationship with them. A third story is Jesus' interaction with the lady who she came up and touched his robe. And this story is in Mark 5. We don't know a lot about this situation. Jesus was on his way to help heal the daughter of a local magistrate who was very, very ill. And they were afraid she was going to die. And so her dad had come and said, hey, will you come and see my daughter? And Jesus said, sure. So he is on a mission. He's going to help save this little girl. And on the way, they're passing through this crowded section of the street. And they are walking by this woman who has pretty severe physical needs. They say that she had been bleeding for about 12 years. She had had all these trips to different doctors. Nobody could help her. She's literally down to her last option. And she hears that Jesus is walking by, and she goes, and she's kind of sneaky. She says, if I can just reach out and touch the hem of his garment, maybe I'll be healed. So she's literally there only to take from him. She wants something from him. That's the only reason she's there. She goes and she reaches down and she touches his robe. And what does it say happened? Well, she's immediately healed, right? Immediately. And Jesus sensed this power flow from him. And so even though it's crowded, he stops and he looks around and he says, hey, who just touched me? And his disciples are like, you're crazy. There's tons of people. How can you say who just touched me? He said, no, someone just touched me. I felt it. Who touched me? She comes forward. And if it was me in that situation, it would likely be that I would have been angry because I would have felt used by this woman. The only reason that she was there is to take from me. But that's not Jesus' posture toward her. She kind of tells him the story. He listens to her. And then very graciously he says, hey, you are healed. Go your way. And we see in that Jesus allowed himself to be interrupted, right? He allowed people to come in and kind of knock his day off course from what he'd planned. But he didn't get irritated with that or annoyed, or even someone who comes to take and only wants from you without giving in return. He wasn't mad at that, but he received her, he acknowledged her, he saw value in her, and she was made well. So these are some different examples of Jesus' life, and you can go and read his life, go read the Gospels and look and see how he interacts with people, and you'll find far more examples. But these were just 3 I picked out this morning. So kind of with that as a baseline, I'm curious, kind of what does your relational porch look like? You know, the relational porch is where relationships begin. Some relationships are going to move past that. Some won't move past that porch. Like, I've got a great mailman. His name's Seth, super friendly. Seth has never been inside my house and probably never will be inside my house because he's there to do one thing, and that's to deliver my mail, and he moves on. Now, he seems like a great guy. I will probably never know. And it's okay for some relationships not to move beyond that point. But there are some relationships that are and will and should move into the interior of your life. So what does your relational porch look like, right? Is it welcoming? Are you sending a message that, hey, I'm glad you're here. I find value in you. Or are you putting off this vibe of, I'm busy, I've got stuff to do, like, I'm going to be about me, you be about you, we're good, right? Think about that. Maybe spend some time thinking about that. What did Jesus' life look like? What was the example he set? What does my life look like? Do I treat people with the same value as he did? Okay, let's move in past the porch and now into the living room. What does your living room look like? I'm not talking about your relational living room, but physical living room. I'm not talking about your dorm room. I'm talking about the place where you actually want to hang out. Well, in most of our living rooms, we've got furniture, nice furniture if we can afford it, but comfortable furniture regardless, right? A place where someone walks in and they feel welcomed. Like, hey, I want to stay here and hang out for a little while, right? You probably have some decorations on the wall, maybe a rug. It's well lit. If someone comes in and they hang out for a while, you probably offer them a glass of water or maybe something else to drink. You want them to feel comfortable. Well, it's the same with your life. You have a relational living room where some people will enter into that space And the question we kind of want to ask today is, like, when they enter that relational living room, how do they feel? They feel like, hey, this guy, this girl, she really takes some time and she values me being here. Or, no, I don't really get that vibe at all, right? So here, what are some things? Let's dig a little bit deeper, this relational living room. It's a place for comfort and connection. It's where here relationships are not accidental. In the relational living room, relationships grow as we assume responsibility for the well-being of others. There's kind of two essential elements, at least two, as you read through the New Testament, that most of these living rooms or your living room should be founded on, but then also furnished with. So first is healthy relationships are going to be built on a foundation of trust. Ephesians 4:25. Ephesians 4:25. Paul is writing to the church at Ephesus, and he's describing the new life that they share in Jesus. And he describes it with the example of before coming to Jesus, you had your old life, this old suit of clothes that you wore. And now that you've chosen to follow Jesus, it's like you're taking off that old suit, that old jacket, that old coat, and you're putting on a new suit, a new jacket, which is this new life in Jesus. And then he gives them this instruction on how they're supposed to relate to one another. In verse 25 of chapter 4 in Ephesians, he says, therefore, laying aside falsehood, speak truth, each one of you with your neighbor, or his neighbor, for we are members of one another. So this idea of laying aside falsehood, what is he talking about? Well, it's not just don't lie to one another. I don't think many of us just are habitual liars, or we go out and just speak falsehood to one another. The idea of laying aside falsehood goes beyond lying with your mouth, and it actually is the idea of, are there falsehoods in your life that you're hiding behind? A lie or a falsehood is essentially an attempt to hide something. It's hiding the truth, reality. You don't want someone to truly see what is there. So you put up a false front, or you tell a lie, a falsehood. And so when Paul says laying aside falsehood, what he's saying is in your lives, when you relate to one another, you have the option of putting up a false reality so they don't see the true you, or living an open and honest life and allowing yourself to be known by others as you truly are. Not as you want them to see you, but as you truly are. So in our lives with one another, we need to lay aside falsehood and then speak truth. Be real. Be honest with one another. For we are members of one another. How he wraps up this verse, which is just the idea that, as the body of Jesus, as the body of our Savior, what should permeate our community is an openness and a realness with one another. Let me give a simple example. Some of you, I'm in this category, when someone comes up and asks me, hey, how was your week? Or how are you doing? It's very easy for me to offer up a platitude of like, man, we're doing great. Or sometimes you'll hear, we're living the dream. Or something else. Well, is that reality? Is that really what's going on in your life? Are you being honest and open? Or are you kind of putting up this false front, this falsehood that you're hiding behind? Because no, actually, my week has been horrible. And are we willing, with people that we trust and know, to live open and honest lives? Laying aside falsehood, speaking truth with one another, so that we're known even as we know others, right? So this kind of serves as a foundation. Healthy relationships are built on a foundation of trust. But then we have a question of, okay, what furnishes your living room space? Once someone's in there, what makes them want to stay? And I'm going to use the example of your character to kind of serve as the example or the illustration for the furnishings in your living room. There's an interesting passage in 1 Peter 3, verses 8 and 9. Peter had been writing to a group of believers. He had been going through a whole set of different relationships, kind of in the church, specific, like family-type relationships. And then he gets to this section in verse 8 of chapter 3, and he says, to sum up, all of you. So he shifts the focus from these specific relationships that he's been writing on, and now he's talking to everyone, just like I'm talking to everyone now. He says, all of you be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit. So how are we supposed to relate with one another? Everyone, all of us, let's be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit, not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead. For you were called for the very purpose that you might inherit a blessing. Paul's dealing with, hey, on the day-to-day, how do we relate with one another? And he gives us this great list, this kind of launching pad for things that we can start building into our lives. Things like being harmonious with one another. That's the ability to be united in spirit and agreeable. You're not constantly taking a conversation on a tangent or arguing about stuff that really doesn't matter. But live harmoniously, right? Be sympathetic. Have the ability to identify with other people and what they might be going through, and even accept them in that, even if it's different than your personal view. So be sympathetic. Brotherly. I really like the way the New Living Translation interprets this word. It says, to love each other as brothers and sisters. To treat one another like family. Grow in your ability to treat one another like family. Be kind-hearted. Want the best for others, right? Not just what's good for you. And then be humble in spirit. Have that humble attitude that says, you know what? I'm willing to put your needs above my own. We kind of see Jesus in Philippians 2 model this really, really well. So those are some of the character qualities that you can begin furnishing the living room of your life with. There's several other passages. I've got some on the board now. I'd encourage you to dig in later this week and really think through, man, what am I furnishing my living room space with? When people move past the front door, do they feel like, hey, I want to hang out with this guy for a while? What's in your heart? What's in your life? Okay, let's move on to the kitchen. The kitchen. This is where relationships go deep. This is where you're authentic, where the real you is known. I bet if I were to take a poll, most people, if they're honest, would have to admit that your kitchen in your home is usually not in the best state. There's usually some clutter. There's either dishes on the counter, or there's some bills or letters over in the corner. Maybe somebody didn't clean up for breakfast or dinner. Maybe the dishes in the dishwasher have been there a little too long. I see some smiles. You know what I'm talking about, right? Why? Well, because in the kitchen, you're not trying to fool anybody. You're being authentic. This is who I really am. It's the same way with your life. The same way with your life. There's an inner part of you that only a few people are truly allowed to enter. It's only by invitation only. But those people that enter, they know the real you, right? Some characteristics of the kitchen. Few are allowed there, but I would caveat that and say we desperately need people who know us well. This is where you let your guard down. You show others who you truly are. This is also where we find our heart. And for the purposes of our illustration this morning, I'm going to use our refrigerator as our heart. You know, in our fridge, we leave all kinds of stuff. We've got mayonnaise, mustard. I'm not a ketchup guy. Some of you guys might have ketchup. I'm out on that. Leftovers. Maybe you went to the grocery store, so you have the items for food later this week. And then probably you have some stuff at the very back of the fridge that you forgot about. Or maybe your mayo is expired. You know, it's a couple years past its date. And if you're not careful, stuff can hang out in your fridge and begin to go bad, and then start to impact everything else. For me, the worst is lettuce. When the lettuce goes bad, I basically want to throw away everything kind of in the vegetable drawer, because it just all kind of tastes like bad lettuce to me. Well, in the same way, your hearts are populated with all different kinds of things. You've got dreams, you've got hopes, you've got hurts, you've got pain. And if you're not careful, just like the bad stuff in your fridge, the stuff in your heart can sour and begin to leach out into all the different areas of your life. And we need people who have access to our refrigerator, who have access to our heart, who can go in and ask us some of those tough questions. But I won't just allow anyone into my kitchen. They need to be invited. And then there's a few really good friends who know that they have permission to go into my fridge, and I've already given them permission. They have access, right? Let me tell a story real quick as we wrap up about one of these kitchen relationships in the Bible. Some of you guys know the story of King David. Very, very influential man. His life kind of hit a turning point, and you see that in 2 Samuel chapter 12. David had committed a pretty egregious sin. He had slept with a woman outside of marriage, fathered a child through that relationship, and to cover it up, he took steps to actually silence her husband, and that ended up in her husband being killed, so he was responsible for the man's murder. And there's this point where after all this has transpired, he continues to kind of try to cover it up. There's something in his heart that, if it's not dealt with, has the potential to just sour the rest of his life. And in chapter 12 of 2 Samuel, a man named Nathan goes. Now, Nathan is a prophet. He's known as a friend of David, and he goes and he confronts David. And a lot of you guys know this story. Well, the story of Nathan and David actually begins several chapters earlier in chapter 7. And in that story, David had just wrapped up a very, very successful period of his rule. Professionally, he was at the top of his game. He'd consolidated all political power. He had instituted Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The nation was thriving. From a military standpoint, he had defeated his enemies. The Philistines were no longer a threat in the way that they had been when he had first come to power. He was winning in every arena of life. And he gets to a point where he says, you know what? God has blessed me so much, I need to do something for God. So he says, I'm going to build a temple for God. And this was like his heart's desire, his great dream. And it was like, this makes total sense. God's blessed me. I want to do something for him. And so he tells his friend Nathan about it. And Nathan, in chapter 7 of 2 Samuel, is like, you know what? You should go for that. God is with you. You should go for that. Well, later that night, God comes to Nathan and says, you know what? David is not the man to build my temple for me. And the next morning, Nathan has to go back to David humbly, because just the night before he'd said, go for it. He had to go back to David and say, David, I recognize this is your dream, but you are not the man God has for this project. It's a good project. It's something he desires as well, but you're not the one. And so Nathan had to be the one to basically kill David's dream. But he did it with humility and boldness and a real grace. And that built a foundation, a standing, so that several years later, when David has now committed this sin and no one's there to call him out on it, and if it's not dealt with, it has the ability to just tank his entire reign. But because the relationship that they've shared, because Nathan has permission to access David's heart, he is able to go in, confront the king in a way that few could, and really begin to push David toward reconciliation, first with God and then with the broader nation. What would have happened without that kitchen relationship? How might history have changed? David's kingdom could have been, his rule could have been, we could look back on that very, very differently. If not for this kitchen relationship that had this man that had access to the king's heart in a very unique and special way. In a similar way, who has access to your heart? Who has permission, your permission, to go into the most private room in your house, the kitchen, and ask you some of those questions? Who have you allowed yourself to be truly known by? I want you guys to ask yourself some questions. Do you have some kitchen relationships? Honestly, do you? If you can say yes, that is good. That's a very good thing. You need to cultivate those relationships. You need to continue to invest in those. Some of you are probably like me and you say, yes, I've got some kitchen friends, people who have access to my heart, but I no longer live proximate to them. They've moved. And that's kind of my story. A lot of the guys that are really close to me, that I've given access to my life, have moved over the years. Different jobs or different opportunities have taken them far away. I ran across this proverb a couple years ago, and it's really been challenging me. It says, do not forsake, this is Proverbs 27:10, do not forsake your friend or your father's friend, and do not go to your brother's house in the day of calamity. And this is the part that gets me. Better is a neighbor who is near than a brother who is far away. Better is a neighbor who is near than a brother who is far away. If my kitchen relationships are now halfway around the U.S. or halfway around the world, this passage is challenging me to invest in new relationships. People here that I don't have to call, and it's a 3-hour plane ride for me to spend some time with them. But guys, I can pick up the phone and say, hey, you got 15 minutes, I need to talk to you about something. I need to work through something. Somebody here. Some of you are in that boat, and some of you guys need to invest in new relationships. Some of you couldn't honestly say, yeah, I've got people who really know me. And you need to start investing in these relationships. So you don't get into a point where King David could have been, where you find yourself out of bounds and there's no one there to call you back. There's no one there with access to your life. So, hopefully this is kind of giving you an idea of the different phases of relationship, giving you a quick self-assessment. I would encourage you later this week, dig in a little bit. Maybe go back through some of those passages I added on the board and really evaluate, where do I stand? Let me wrap up with this. Let me ask a couple more questions. Is there something maybe this morning that you heard that you need to take action on? Something stick home, something you need to spend more time with Jesus on, something you need to ask his help with, to address. Individually, small groups are starting up, not this week, but next week. I would encourage you guys to consider getting involved in a community group, a small group. Why? Because the community group space in River is designed to be a place where we can begin to experience living room level relationships with one another. You can allow yourself to be known, and others can know you. you can begin to love others with the same love that Jesus has loved you. We can follow him into that, right? So I would encourage you to consider that, to think about that. College kids, you got a lot on your plate. So although you are more than welcome to come and be involved in group life at River, what I would recommend that you do is touch base with Brent. He's been in your shoes. He knows the demands that you guys have on a day-to-day basis, and that might be that you need to invest in some relationships on campus or somewhere else. And he can help you just process through what is the right and best place for me to get involved, because I want this kind of relationship. So I'd encourage you to go talk to Brent. And then as a church, let me leave us with this. I'm going to plant some seeds for next week, collectively. River, what is our porch? What is our living room space like? As we think about the neighborhoods that are around this building, as we think about the schools, we got 2 elementary schools, we got a high school, all within a mile radius. We've got broad disparity in income. Golf course, train tracks, all within a mile radius. What's our porch? Are we welcoming to this community when we have walkthroughs? Does this church love those people the same way that Jesus loved the people that interacted with him and interrupted him on the daily basis? And then what is our living room like? Are we welcoming people beyond the porch into a living room space where they feel welcomed, known, valued? As a church, not just as individuals, but as a church, let's start wrestling with these questions, okay? So, as usual, I've gone longer than I intended to go. I appreciate everybody's patience. Let me wrap up and pray, and then we'll begin to close out our morning. Father, we want to be people who follow your command to love one another and love one another well, just as you've loved us well. We want to be people who are marked by this. And so, Jesus, I would ask just that this week you would really challenge us in the areas of our relational porch, living room, kitchen, and we could ask some questions of ourselves about where we stand in each of these areas. And then as a church, Father, be leading us into how do we love our city well, love our neighbors well. How do we follow you in that? We love you, Lord. We want to reflect you. And we thank you for the way that you've loved us. In your wonderful name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.